On today's episode of Taking the Floor, I get to interview my co-host Kandis Daroski on everything from her best pregnancy and postpartum advice to what drew her to be a pelvic floor PT in the first place, to her all-time favorite candy. Get ready to get to know one of the voices behind the podcast and one of the brains behind your Hinge Health program.
Welcome to Taking the Floor, the podcast from Hinge Health about pelvic health, movement, and taking charge of your well-being.
We're your hosts.
I'm Kandis Daroski.
And I'm Bijal Toprani, and we're both pelvic health physical therapists here at Hinge Health. Thanks for being here. We're really excited about this episode because it's going to be a little different than what we've done so far. We decided to flip the script and let our PTs be the host, the guest, and the topic. That way you can get to know us a little bit better and get more great pelvic health and movement advice at the same time. Kandis, I can't wait to ask you so many questions today about your life, your work, and how you got into the pelvic health space. We worked together for about 2.5 years now, and I feel like I know you pretty well already, but I really can't wait to go even deeper.
Thanks, Bijal. I am so excited to just kind of let my hair down a little bit today. I'm feeling a little classy, maybe a little sassy, so it's going to be a fun time. We don't always get to chat about these types of things. So I'm ready to get into it.
All right. I would like to maybe dive into some rapid fire speed round questions. So I'm going to start off with a lighter one. What's your favorite candy?
Sour Patch Kids. Specifically, I like the watermelon shaped and flavored ones.
Okay. All right. I was with you on the Sour Patch, but not the watermelon. I like the green ones, the little green guys. But anyway, what's your go-to karaoke song?
Country Roads by John Denver. Absolutely. I'm going to sing that whenever given the opportunity because I really believe that everybody wants to be a West Virginian at heart. So
that is a great song.
I know. It's great.
All right. What's your favorite quote or like general life advice?
I think I always try to remember that there is always some kind of wonderful. There's always some kind of wonderful. I always think of it that way. Like, you know, things don't always go the way that you want them to, or maybe they do sometimes, but in any situation, there's some kind of wonderful.
Yeah, you always teach me about gratitude every time we connect, so that doesn't surprise me. What about your favorite way to move your body?
Right now, I am loving like everything Pilates, bar, like slower, more intentional types of movement, which is really different than what I used to like to do, which was like more of that like high impact, hit, go as hard as you can. But I find that like lately, I just really want to kind of connect to my muscles and be able to like understand what's actually going on. And so I've been really loving the bar. It's never bad to feel like a ballet queen on a Tuesday either.
No, that's very true. And how do you deal with like life when it gets stressful? What's kind of your go-to stress relief?
I've got a lot lately. I'll tell you the silly one, and then maybe I can tell you a more serious one. But lately, I'm just very into sourdough bread baking, so I will just put on the best of Celine Dion and just whip it up, you know, some bread. Because how can you really be stressed whenever you're singing? But on that note too, I also really love to like get my family involved, so spend time with family. And try to like really teach my kids, you know, that there's different ways to manage stress and it doesn't always have to be these really big, profound ways. So sometimes when the tension is high at a dinner table with 2 toddlers and, you know, there's food flying everywhere, like we just take a pause and we have an after dinner dance party. And sometimes it's 30 seconds, sometimes it's 30 minutes. But what I find is that like, it's really hard to take yourself seriously or be stressed when you're like moving and grooving. And so probably sing, dance, just get some stuff done, you know.
Yeah, I love that. Your house seems really fun. I'm kind of jealous. I'm like, I want to come over for sing and dance parties. But you're right. You can't really be stressful when you sing. I tend to do that a lot too, mainly in the shower. Let's get more into your story. Can you tell us a little more about you personally, where you're from? Tell us about your family.
Of course. I'm from West Virginia, so I'm kind of this West Virginia gal at heart. I was born, raised there, got my education there. So go Mountaineers, have to put that plug in first. I live currently in a tiny little town in Northeast Ohio, pretty rural setting. I like to make the joke that I have 3 toddlers, if you count my husband as one of those. Sorry, dear. But I've got 2 little ones that are 3 and under. And I actually have another babe joining us in just a few short weeks. So we are moving on to number 3.
That is so exciting. I have a ton of questions about your pregnancy and your postpartum journey, but I'm going to wait a little bit longer before I dive into all of that. First, I want to know what made you decide to become a physical therapist?
Great question. So I think if you asked me, my answer, 8 years ago would be a little different than my answer is today. And so I initially became a physical therapist because of all the reasons that many people do. They wanted to work with people. I really valued exercise. I had always grown up being super active in sports and that kind of stuff. But then more specifically, I was really fortunate to become a pelvic health physical therapist really early in my career. So I've been a PT for almost 10 years now. And at the beginning of my career, maybe within the first year and a half, I sort of if you know me, and Bijal, you kind of know this about me, I really like to see the big picture, and I really like to understand all of the components of whatever I'm working on. And I felt like there was this huge gap in my knowledge. I was really working with a lot of people that had back pain or, hip pain and that sort of stuff, and was doing all the things. And I was asking them questions about their pelvic floor, but I didn't really know what to do after asking them the questions. And so that really bothered me. So at that point, I went and kind of pursued the additional education it takes to be a pelvic health PT. And, that involves going to lots of different courses. This is, unfortunately not something we learn in the basic curriculum. But something I've been thinking about a lot lately is sort of why I stay doing this work. And I think hindsight is 2020, And so what I know is that as a young adult, I went through so many things in my personal life that I can really see my patients now having to go through. And so for me, that looked like a huge access to care that I needed. And so when I was in PT school, I actually was really kind of at the height of dealing with an eating disorder that I had been dealing with for many years. But it was really kind of at this point where I needed help quite badly. And I didn't have support or access where I lived. So there wasn't a doctor. There wasn't any treatment places. I'm in the middle of PT school, literally I think I had 2 semesters left or something. And so my options sort of looked quit PT school for the moment and go somewhere else, or don't get care, don't get help. And it was really the compassion and empathy of literally one doctor where I lived who was I am just willing to try to do this in a non-traditional way with you because I understand the barriers that you have today to kind of getting the care that you need and to getting better. So it was just fantastic. She was actually a pediatrician. So you imagine me sitting in these tiny little pediatric chairs in the waiting room. And she really worked with me, and she really worked to find a solution that kept me able to live my life and keep on, the path that I was going on without being disruptive to life. But it took that compassion, that empathy. So fast forward to where I am today and the role that I have here at Hinge Health. And it really is about that, right? It's about kind of getting this kind of care to people who don't have access to it, who maybe need a different route, who can't make it to in-person, who feel more comfortable with this style of treatment. And that's why I stay in doing this. And I would not have been able to kind of put all those pieces together and understand that part of my own personal story without my story that kind of crosses over here at Hinge Health with you.
Oh my gosh. I have so many things that I want to respond with, but first I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being open about that history and about, what you went through at that stage in life. I think that that's something that we all talk about a lot is like, the fact that pelvic health PTs have heard it all and we don't want to embarrass people or make them feel ashamed and stuff. And I think you just kind of owning like kind of a harder part of your history and helping us kind of understand like how that influenced some of your decisions with your career. It means a lot to me to have received that. So I really am appreciative of you sharing that.
Yeah, everyone has a story, and I think that's so important for us as PTs to bring with us and in our care for other human beings, right? Is to just understand that everyone's story is unique, and our jobs are to really understand that person and how we can best serve that singular person in front of us. So always happy to share that.
Okay, so now let's talk about everything pregnancy and postpartum. Kid number 3 is on its way. What do you know now about your body that you wish you knew back when you were pregnant the first time?
That I'm super resilient, that, my body is okay and it's going to make it through this. I think the narrative often around being pregnant is that like it's the end of like one part of your life and then this beginning of the next part. And sometimes we can also like apply that to our bodies. Like we're not going to be able to like run again or like do these things. And I was really shocked after having my first baby that like taking time to heal and, all of those things was really, really important. But that it wasn't that I became this like feeble person, right? Like I healed and I did well and I got back to doing the things that I like to do. So definitely wish that I knew that before my first pregnancy because I think it would have reduced a lot of anxiety for me.
I'd also love to know a little more about your perspective on C-sections as a pelvic floor PT, if you don't mind sharing some of your thoughts.
I have so many thoughts. This is a big part of my story. Actually, I'm about to have my 3rd C-section, which is often, I think, kind of shocking to people because I'm a pelvic floor physical therapist. And sometimes, the messaging can really be around like trying to do it, quote unquote, naturally and have a vaginal birth. And this was something I actually struggled a lot with my first pregnancy. I had a high risk pregnancy. And the only way I could get that little babe here earthside was through a C-section. But I went through a lot of grief with that because I had in my head this idea of, a vaginal birth. And I'm a pelvic floor physical therapist. And I know all the things about how to make that go as smooth as possible. And I want to feel really strong and all of those things that I thought I was going to experience. But there shouldn't be any like shame associated with having to maybe take a different route because ultimately we all have the same goal, and that's to make it through that experience with a healthy mom and a healthy baby. And we do need to listen to the advice of a trusted healthcare provider. Now, I'm not saying don't advocate for yourself and don't ask questions. I asked those questions after my first one. And I think what we need to be really brave to talk about is that each birthing experience will teach you something different and you need some other unique and different skill for that, right? So maybe you're having a vaginal birth and you're really going to lean hard into like the endurance and the strength and the stamina and like, dealing with the pain and all of those things that birthing experience comes with. But when you're maybe having a C-section, maybe you're working a little bit more on being trusting, leaning into that patience it might take to maybe recover from that. And so it really is a mindset. You guys have heard me say it so many times. Your body is going to do what your mind is thinking. And so if you're going into that experience and you're thinking, I don't want to have a C-section, this isn't the right thing for me, everything after that part is going to feel so much harder because you didn't want to have that experience, So really feeling good about it, feeling empowered. And then from the more kind of like tactical, logistical end, I think there's a huge misconception that if you have a C-section, your pelvic floor is not going to have any problems and you don't need to think about any of the things that we talk about on this podcast, which is really like farthest from the truth. You do. And that's a major surgery to your abdominal muscles, which really can impact the health of your pelvic floor muscles. So I really just want to advocate for anybody that's had a C-section to really still kind of seek out this type of care. Make sure that you're rehabbing appropriately, because you can be impacted and you'll see a lot of great benefits from PT.
That makes a lot of sense. You come with like such a wealth of knowledge, and the fact that, you were already a pelvic health PT before you had kids. You have two and you have another one on the way. And also with just like your job here. And so with that, I feel like you have a really cool perspective on just like pregnancy and that journey. And I wanted to ask you some Mad Libs, if you don't mind, so you can kind of fill in the blank and really give us a perspective on all of that. So are you ready for some Mad Libs?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So as a pelvic floor physical therapist, I wish every pregnant person knew blank.
I wish every pregnant person would stretch their hip flexors. That's just a muscle group that you don't think about a lot, but it's changing, you're sitting, those muscles are taking on a different shape, and it's 9 months typically that you're pregnant. So, think about kind of getting into some odd posture for 9 months and what that might feel like. So get out there and stretch your hip flexors, friends.
All right. What about, as a pelvic floor PT, I wish more people knew blank about exercise.
I wish more people knew that exercise wasn't so binary. Like, it's not an all or nothing, or like I have to do this or I have to do that. It can be this like free floating thing, and it can very much be an evolution for you. You can start off really loving one type of movement or exercise, and over time you can change, right? And it's totally okay. I think sometimes we get really honed in on like, I want to be a weightlifter, or I want to be a runner, or I want to be this. And that's the kind of exercise that I like to do or want to do. And we can give ourselves some more flexibility. We can change.
Dude, that's such good advice. Like, not just for the perinatal population, but for everybody, right? Like, we don't have to be rigid. We can change our minds. We're allowed to change our minds. And movement is just important. The pelvic floor myth that bugs me the most is blank.
So I think the obvious, or the elephant in the room, is that like Kegels are going to be the only solution for, your problem, right? And we hear that a lot, and I think it's just something that a lot of people know about. So it's usually like the first thing that you'll hear about on social media, or that like a doctor or somebody, or maybe even another therapist might prescribe to you. But I'm just a really big advocate for like the whole body holistic approach, which includes, working on the core, working on flexibility, working on breath work, and how all those things go together. And I just find that people are so much more successful when they look at it that way. So, the myth is that you should only be doing Kegels, or that's all you have to do. And I always love busting that one with you, Bijal.
That's so true. In fact, we have a whole episode about Kegels, so give that a listen. Next up, as a pelvic floor PT, make sure you talk to your OBGYN or pregnancy care provider about blank in your 6-week checkup.
I would say talk to them about your intended activity level that you're wanting to get back to, because everybody's story is so different and everybody enjoys doing different things, and our lifestyles are all very different. And so exercise is like a pretty broad term, right? Exercise could mean going on a walk down the road. It could mean running in the Boston Marathon again. And so like making sure you're having those conversations, because you're usually just asking them, hey, can I go back to exercise? And they're looking at it from this broad perspective, and they're like, sure, right? So I would just be sure to give like some clarity around what you're wanting to do. Hey, I'm wanting to go back to doing CrossFit. Like, do you think this is a good idea? Now, how do you recommend that? They may not have all of the answers for those things. So that's okay. But what you can do if they don't have that answer is, really like ask for some additional support from a pelvic floor therapist or something like that, right? So, hey, great, thank you. would it be okay if I continued this discussion with maybe somebody who specializes in the exercise side of things?
Really, really good points. I love that. Expanding on what your goals are, advocating for yourself, asking the right questions, all very good points. All right. Now, I wanted to ask you a couple questions about like aging and menopause and just kind of the pelvic floor in that. So, the last couple are going to be around those topics. I wish more people knew blank about the pelvic floor and the aging process.
That the pelvic floor, that they're a group of muscles just like any other muscles, right? Like in just like maybe your legs or your arm muscles would get a little bit weaker if you stopped moving as much. The pelvic floor is susceptible to that too, right? So stay active. Make sure that you're strengthening and considering your pelvic floor as you do age.
Awesome. And as a pelvic floor PT, the one thing I'm doing to prepare for menopause is blank. Now, I know you're far from that, so don't take it personally, but I think the listeners would like to know.
Yeah, this is such an important one. I love this one because I actually am starting to think about that a little bit, this is my last kiddo, I'm thinking, and, I'm starting to think about this like next phase of life after that. But I think the one thing that is really important for me is to read and educate myself on what to expect. And then also to find a menopause specific kind of provider. So somebody who sort of knows a lot in that space so that when I'm starting to feel some symptoms or even before that, I can really get in with them, talk about what might be the best options for me.
Let's go a little deeper now. I feel like as PTs, we all have some topics or care areas that really hit close to home and we feel especially passionate about raising awareness for. Anyone who's listened to our pooping episode might have an inkling that this is yours. Is that true? And if so, why?
For sure. It's totally true. I will own that. I love to talk about poop and I like to talk about it because I think that it's something that everybody can easily understand and has probably experienced some difficulty in and around having a bowel movement. And when we can talk about things like that, then we can start to really make others understand how much these types of symptoms can impact a person's life. And so that's kind of why I'm always talking about that, but also because I think there's a lot of just like really simple things that you can try within your daily life when it comes to having difficulty with bowel movements or even, fecal incontinence or leakage. I think another like close tie to that might be pelvic pain or more specifically, like when somebody is experiencing pain with intercourse, which has this really formal fancy name called dyspareunia. And I think that I really love treating that condition because it's very often that I find that people have really not gotten a lot of help because it's just kind of like either gotten swept around or they haven't really talked about it a lot, or it's kind of been brushed off as like a postpartum symptom or something like that. And to me, I mean, that's a really intimate, important part of life, And so I love to be an ear for those people and really kind of like help them along the way, get them started on a treatment plan and help kind of like navigate them towards improving symptoms.
Very cool. I'm also curious when random people find out that you're a pelvic floor PT and they start kind of throwing questions at you, what are some of the most common questions that you get or the most common advice that you share?
First of all, this happens all the time. I can't even tell you like how much this happens. The DMs, they fly in, but I also understand that like I am the person who's like in the supermarket, like shouting about like the pelvic floor. So I fully welcome the questions, give them to me. I'm here to provide some answers and clarity. But I think the most common advice that I give people, this is going to sound corny, but is to see a pelvic floor physical therapist themselves because I can't possibly like know every part of their story in a short little blurb and want to make sure that they're getting like really comprehensive care. So I would never like just want to give somebody something in like the supermarket, aisle and tell them that was sufficient because I think there's so much more that goes into it. But generally speaking, there are some small things around, like your diet or like we talk a lot about bladder habits, right? Like just in case peeing and those sorts of things that I will often educate people on because, it's hard to find like really great information about it online. And so if I can give them just a short little tip that they can try that day, like I'm all game for that.
Yeah, speaking of the whole bladder habits thing, since we did our urinary urgency episode, I've been wanting to know, have you or your own bladder or bathroom behaviors changed at all since you finished your pelvic floor physical therapy specific training?
Yes. And it's really funny. Like after I first went to all the different courses and, that took me like a little over a year to complete all the different stuff, I would always like count while I was like peeing. I'm like, okay, did I really have to pee this time? And so now I don't have to do it as much because I feel like my body's like really kind of in tune with when I actually do need to go. And I've sort of like retrained my bladder. But I do actually find that it really influences the way that I talk to my kids about the bathroom, especially like through the potty training phase. Like it's really easy. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? It's like, we know there might be an accident if we don't go right now, but sometimes I have like the best pelvic PT mom moment when like my daughter will like sit on the potty and then take a nice deep breath. And I'm like, yes, my work here is done.
And what's the most satisfying thing about seeing people as a pelvic floor PT? Like, do you have any, really memorable patient stories that come to mind or anything that you really feel, you really like about, your role as a pelvic floor physical therapist?
Yeah, being a pelvic floor PT it's changed my life. I mean, empowering people to see their life from a different lens, I think is the most satisfying thing because often people come in and they don't have any idea what to expect. They are at a point where they feel really like sort of at a low point of hope with their symptoms. They're ready to write them off as like, this is the rest of my life, right? And they're not always so sure that something like exercise or even just changing some things about their lifestyle could improve their symptoms. But when you kind of walk hand in hand with somebody and you go on that journey with them and each time you talk to them, they seem a little lighter, right? Like they seem a little more free. And then by the end of it, like they're telling you all these things that they've done and their life is so different than the first day that you met them. I think that's the most empowering piece of it all, is really just seeing people live their life more fully, free of their symptoms. But, also hopefully, this is kind of obvious, but like the impact that they make on my life, right? The way that they make me think about what empathy means, right? Like maybe I don't know what your situation necessarily feels like because I haven't been in it, but you're making me have to sit back and kind of consider these things and how that is a really important part of a treatment plan, right? Is making sure that your provider is listening to you and hearing those things. And I don't know if I can say I was doing those things as good as I should have been before I became a pelvic floor PT.
Finally, you've spent years treating people's pelvic floor problems. Why did you want to host this podcast? What do you hope people really get out of it?
I hope that people learn a few things along the way. One being that, pelvic floor physical therapists love what we do. This is something that we are super passionate about, and that hopefully people are able to hear that, because that passion from a provider is such an important piece of a treatment plan, and really connecting with somebody who's going to like hear you and understand what's going on with your situation. But really just like taking that like step back, even if just like one person resonated with something that I have said along the way during this show, then I've done my job, right? Like if whether that's something tangible like a tip, or that's something that they feel empowered by, I want to leave people with messages that make them feel more equipped, that make them feel more powerful and more aware. And I think we have to do that through one conversation at a time. And so I hope that our work here, Bijal, really kind of breaking down some myths and really talking around the importance of this kind of care has done that for somebody.
I would agree. That would be a really amazing thing. And as we always wrap up, we like to say taking care of your pelvic health is non-negotiable. It's just as important as any other aspect of health. Let's do a quick check-in on how else we're taking care of ourselves this week. So what's your non-negotiable, Kandis?
I'm trying to focus on some sleep hygiene. It's really hard, honestly, with some little ones who are having some struggles with sleeping, but I think that there's ways that I can work around that. And so, making sure that I'm just communicating with my husband on, hey, maybe you can take bedtime routine tonight so that I can maybe get in bed at a certain time. But it's really important to me as I move closer to the big birth experience. What's top of mind for you?
Yeah, thanks for sharing the sleep one. I think you always do a really good job of like, what's the next, even smallest step I can take to make this happen for myself. So I appreciate you saying that. My non-negotiable is that I have been experimenting with like not creating a false sense of urgency. So like I notice sometimes like if I get a text from like a friend or my sister or whatever, like I feel like I have to respond right away. And it kind of makes me a little bit anxious. And so recently I've been like swiping the text away. Like it'll come on my screen and I'll see, oh, that's not like super urgent. And I'll just swipe it away. And then at some point I'll sit down and like respond to them when I have time in my own time. So a non-negotiable for me has been like really prioritizing what's really urgent and putting into perspective what's not so urgent to kind of quell some of those anxious feelings that I've been having.
That's brilliant. I need to try that sometimes. I feel like that probably leads to like a lot more quality conversation as well, like because you're not just like responding as fast as you can. You can really sit down and think about what that person needs from you.
100%.
Thank you all so much for listening today. Remember, if you're dealing with pelvic floor issues, you are not alone, and we are here for you. We also just wanted to note, if you are dealing with an eating disorder or even just want some help with a tricky relationship with food or exercise, please visit nationaleatingdisorders.org to seek support. The information contained in this podcast is intended to be used for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice or treatment for any specific condition. Please consult with your healthcare provider with any questions you may have about your medical condition or treatment. Check out your Hinge Health app library for new episodes coming soon.